The galactic arena. The hum of machinery and the distant murmur of voices filled the vast training hall, a sound that had become second nature to Cadet Eric Thompson. His feet echoed across the sleek, metallic floor as he made his way to the combat simulator, his eyes focused on the glowing blue grid that marked the center of the room. For most cadets, this was just another routine training session, but for Eric, this was the day he would face the harsh truth about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Galactic Armed Forces Academy, a place where species from all corners of the universe came together to train, learn, and battle, had long been the crucible in which the strongest warriors were forged. Alien races, some millennia older and more advanced than humanity, had dominated the galaxy for eons. And yet, as humanity's first ventures into space progressed, it became clear that Earth's warriors weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Eric had joined the Academy with dreams of proving that humanity was capable of more than just being a new player in an old game. Earth was young, but the humans had something that made them stand out. An indomitable will, an adaptability that made them excel when pushed to the limit. For the most part, his fellow cadets from other species had looked to humans as something of a curiosity. Many were respectful, but there was always that underlying sense that humans didn't truly belong in the upper echelons of galactic combat. And that, in turn, made Eric all the more determined to prove everyone wrong. Today, however, would bring a test of a different nature. Eric Thompson, the voice of the Academy's artificial intelligence, Sage, interrupted his thoughts. The cold, mechanical tone reverberated through the room. You are requested in the main hall. A challenge has been issued. A challenge. Eric's heart skipped a beat. He'd heard the rumors, the whispers circulating throughout the Academy about the Drexar cadet who had been throwing his weight around. Zor'Khaz, the Drexar representative in the Academy, had been causing trouble for months now. A towering figure from a species known for their brutal strength and long history of warfare, Zor'Khaz had been dismissing humans as weak, beneath his notice, and had even gone so far as to challenge any human who dared to prove their worth in combat. It wasn't a surprise, then, when Eric found himself standing before the imposing figure of Zor'Khaz in the Academy's main arena, the vast training ground where cadets were tested. The crowd of cadets, mostly alien, with a few humans scattered among them, was already gathering, murmuring in hushed tones. Eric could feel their eyes on him, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Most humans had learned to ignore the aliens' jeering, but it was hard not to notice. Zor'Khaz stood at the center of the arena, his massive form silhouetted against the holographic sky projected above. His crimson skin rippled with muscle, and his forearms flexed as he cracked his knuckles with a loud snap. His deep-set eyes scanned the crowd, a fierce sneer curling his lip. Any human foolish enough to face me will regret it, Zor'Khaz's voice boomed, amplified by the arena sound system. I will crush you like an insect beneath my foot. Eric felt the weight of those words, the pressure mounting in his chest. He had heard Zor'Khaz taunt humans before, but hearing it in person felt different. The Drexar was well known throughout the galaxy for his strength, his speed, and his merciless tactics in battle. To challenge him was madness. Yet, Eric's fist clenched, his resolve hardening. He wasn't afraid. I'll take you on, Eric said, his voice carrying across the arena, cutting through the alien murmurs. He stepped forward, locking eyes with Zor'Khaz. The Drexar raised an eyebrow. You? He said, his voice dripping with disbelief. A mere human? Yes, Eric replied, standing tall despite his much smaller frame. I'll fight you, and I'll show you what humans are capable of. The laughter that erupted from the crowd only fueled Eric's determination. As if to mock him, Zor'Khaz cracked his neck and grinned wider. Very well, human, Zor'Khaz sneered. Prepare to be humiliated. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. His instinct screamed that he was walking into a trap, that he might be out of his depth, but something deeper inside urged him to stand firm. This was more than just about him. This was about proving humanity's place in a galaxy that had long looked down on them. His fellow humans, gathered at the edge of the arena, were already beginning to murmur amongst themselves. Some were uncertain, others angry, But all of them shared one emotion: the desire to prove that they were more than just another species in a galaxy full of predators. Eric was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for humanity's reputation. The arena began to shift as the lights dimmed, and the countdown to the duel started. The massive holographic screens that hovered above the combatants flickered to life, displaying the countdown. Eric focused on his breathing, blocking out the noise. "Stay calm. Stay focused," he told himself. The seconds ticked by as Zor'Khaz prepared himself, his forearms stretching and flexing, showing off the raw power in his body. Eric did the opposite. He didn't need to show off. His strength wasn't in his size, it was in his mind. He had faced impossible odds before, and this time it was no different. As the countdown reached 0, Eric squared off with Zor'Khaz. The Drexar lunged first, his massive fist swinging toward Eric's head. But Eric was already in motion, his body ducking and weaving, anticipating the strike before it even landed. He had trained for moments like this, refining his reflexes and his ability to read his opponent's moves. This was just the beginning. The duel in the arena. The artificial sun above the Academy's arena blazed down, casting harsh shadows on the ground as Eric Thompson faced Zor'Khaz. His heart raced, but his mind was calm, too calm. He could hear the crowd's murmurs, the hushed excitement rippling through the alien spectators. None of them, not even the humans in the crowd, could fully understand what was at stake. Zor'Khaz was a walking mountain of muscle, his crimson skin gleaming under the artificial sun, his forearms flexing as he stood tall, his massive claws digging into the sand beneath him. Eric, in comparison, was small, just an average human cadet in his early 20s, with the lean build of someone who had spent more hours training than in a gym. But there was no mistaking his determination. Today, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every human who had ever been underestimated in the vast galaxy. The countdown finished, and Zor'Khaz was the first to move. The Drexar's 4 muscular arms whipped forward, aiming to crush Eric with a flurry of brutal strikes. His fists were like boulders, moving with terrifying speed, but Eric had seen this before. He'd studied his opponent. The Drexar were powerful, yes, but they were also predictable. Their aggression was their strength and their weakness. Eric dodged the first swing easily, sidestepping and rolling to the side as the massive fist plummeted into the sand where he had stood moments before. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Zor'Khaz roared in frustration and quickly pivoted, launching another set of punches. Eric's mind raced, calculating the trajectory of each blow. His training in the academy had focused not just on combat, but on the science of battle, timing, precision, and, most importantly, endurance. Another punch came at him, fast and lethal. Eric darted to the right, his body moving almost instinctively. He could feel the wind from the punch brushing past his face, a constant reminder of how close he was to defeat. His foot caught a slight imperfection in the sand, but he recovered just in time. His eyes locked on his Zor'Khaz's exposed side. In a flash, Eric closed the gap between them, ducking under the Drexar's massive arm and bringing his knee up into the side of Zor'Khaz's abdomen. The blow landed with a satisfying thud, but the Drexar barely flinched, his muscle mass absorbing most of the impact. Zor'Khaz grinned, clearly impressed by the human's audacity, but his expression shifted quickly to one of growing rage. "You think you could defeat me, human?" Zor'Khaz growled, his voice deep and mocking. "I will crush your bones." Zor'Khaz spun on his heel and swung his lower right fist downward, aiming to bring it down on Eric's head. The human cadet was already moving before the punch even began its descent, ducking low and rolling away just in time. Zor'Khaz's fist missed by a hair's breadth, crashing into the sand with a deafening thud that sent shockwaves through the arena. The ground trembled, and the air was thick with dust. The spectators recoiled in shock, their eyes wide as Eric nimbly rose to his feet once more. Eric wasn't just avoiding Zor'Khaz's strikes. He was studying the alien's movements, looking for weaknesses, waiting for the right moment. He knew brute strength wasn't going to win this fight. It was about patience, about wearing the Drexar down, and then striking decisively when the opportunity came. Zor'Khaz growled, furious, and his next series of attacks came even faster. He launched a flurry of high-speed punches, aiming to overwhelm Eric with sheer force. But the human cadet was no longer just dodging. His body had begun to move fluidly, with purpose, with precision. He stepped inside Zor'Khaz's defenses, avoiding the wild swings and jabbing quick, measured strikes to the Drexar's side, targeting the ribs. Eric's fists landed with sharp cracks. Nothing that would send the giant sprawling, but enough to make Zor'Khaz slow his pace, just for a moment. The Drexar stumbled backward, his foot sinking deeper into the sand, momentarily off balance. Eric saw his chance and wasted no time. He lunged forward, his right fist landing squarely into the side of Zor'Khaz's neck. The blow hit just below the joint, a precise strike to the vulnerable area of his anatomy. The Drexar's eyes widened in shock as his massive form lurched to the side, but he didn't fall. He barely even staggered. For a moment, Zor'Khaz was silent, and the arena seemed to hold its breath. He looked down at Eric with a mix of disbelief and amusement. Impressive, Zor'Khaz admitted, his voice low. But you are still nothing compared to me. Eric didn't have time to respond. Zor'Khaz roared and swung his remaining arm in a wide arc, his fist coming at Eric with the force of a sledgehammer. The cadet had no choice but to dive under the strike, rolling forward and coming up behind the Drexar, his pulse racing. Zor'Khaz whirled around, fury blazing in his eyes, but his movements were becoming more erratic. He was starting to lose control. Eric's calculated approach was wearing on the Drexar's pride, and the more reckless Zor'Khaz became, the more openings Eric found. The human cadet wasn't faster, but he was more fluid, his movements precise and methodical. And then, in a moment of rare vulnerability, Zor'Khaz swung his right fist downward with such force that it left him open. Eric's mind snapped into focus. He ducked low, slid under the Drexar's reach, and landed behind him. Without hesitation, he drove his elbow into the back of Zor'Khaz's knee, knocking it out from under the Drexar. Zor'Khaz roared in surprise and pain, collapsing to one knee. Eric wasn't finished. With one swift motion, he jabbed his foot into the Drexar's chest, sending Zor'Khaz stumbling back, his balance lost. The crowd fell into stunned silence as Zor'Khaz, the mighty warrior, struggled to rise, but Eric stood tall, unshaken. His breathing was steady, every muscle honed to perfection. Zor'Khaz was no longer the unstoppable juggernaut. Eric had proven that. Now, it was only a matter of time. The fall of the bully. The tension in the arena was palpable. The crowd, once filled with disbelief and mockery, now watched in stunned silence as Zor'Khaz staggered back to his feet, his body shaking with the realization that he was not invincible. Eric Thompson stood across from him, breath steady, heart pounding in his chest. His body was sore from the relentless assault, but it was nothing compared to the fatigue creeping into Zor'Khaz's movements. The Drexar, a being known for his brutal strength and speed, was beginning to falter. For the first time since the duel began, Zor'Khaz's confidence was slipping. The mighty warrior was no longer an unstoppable force. His eyes, wide with anger and disbelief, burned with the humiliation of being challenged by a human and losing ground. "You think you've won?" Zor'Khaz growled, his voice thick with contempt. "You are nothing but a weakling in a human body." Eric's eyes narrowed. "You were wrong about us, Zor'Khaz. Humanity may be young, but we've got something you'll never understand: adaptability. I've watched you. Learn how you fight. You rely on brute force, but that's your weakness." His words were steady, calm, but there was a fierce edge to them now. He wasn't just defending humanity's honor. He was about to make history. Zor'Khaz took a deep breath, his chest heaving as his forearms flexed in a show of strength. He charged again, faster this time, his fists swinging with a deadly force. Eric's instinct screamed for him to move, but his mind stayed clear. He'd been preparing for this moment since he'd accepted the challenge. Every punch Zor'Khaz threw was an opportunity, an opening to exploit. Eric darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow that would have flattened him. Zor'Khaz's momentum carried him forward, his balance disrupted by his own aggression. Eric pressed the advantage, sidestepping and striking out with a precise jab to Zor'Khaz's ribs, targeting a weak spot where the Drexar's muscles didn't cover as thoroughly. Zor'Khaz let out a grunt of pain, but he didn't stop. His upper right arm lashed out, catching Eric on the shoulder, sending him tumbling across the sand. The force of the blow rattled Eric's bones, and for a moment, the world spun. But he quickly recovered, pushing himself back to his feet. His vision blurred, but his focus remained razor-sharp. He had to finish this. "You cannot win, human." Zor'Khaz roared, his voice booming across the arena. "You have no strength, no power. You are nothing without me." Eric's lips tightened. There was again the arrogance. It was the same thing he'd heard from every species who underestimated humanity. Zor'Khaz thought power alone made him unbeatable. But power wasn't the key to victory in this fight. The key was precision, timing, and understanding his opponent's weaknesses. Zor'Khaz charged again, his massive fists swinging in a series of wild punches. Eric ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding each strike until he found his opening. Zor'Khaz's blows were growing slower, more predictable as fatigue set in. The Drexar was no longer moving with the grace and power of a seasoned fighter. His frustration was evident, and it was exactly what Eric had been waiting for. With one final dodge, Eric darted to Zor'Khaz's blind spot behind his massive form. The Drexar turned too slowly to react, and that's when Eric saw it, the vulnerable joint at the back of Zor'Khaz's knee. He had been waiting for this. In one smooth motion, Eric planted his foot against the Drexar's leg and used his momentum to propel himself upward. With a swift, well-aimed strike, Eric's elbow connected with the back of Zor'Khaz's knee. Zor'Khaz let out a roar of pain, and for the first time, the mighty warrior faltered. His leg buckled, and he fell to the ground with a thunderous crash. The sand beneath him shook with the impact, and the arena was plunged into silence. Zor'Khaz lay on the ground, his chest heaving, his breathing labored. Eric stood over him, his chest rising and falling with every breath, every heartbeat. The crowd was still, as though time had stopped. Zor'Khaz glared up at him, eyes filled with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The Drexar's massive form trembled as he tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. For all his strength, for all his years of experience, Zor'Khaz couldn't get up. He was finished. "You should have known better than to underestimate me," Eric said, his voice low but clear. He didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. The Drexar let out a growl of frustration, but there was no strength left in it. Zor'Khaz's pride had been shattered in front of the entire academy, and there was no coming back from that. His arrogance had been his downfall. "Get up," Zor'Khaz spat, his voice weak, barely above a whisper. "Finish it." Eric shook his head. "You're done. You've lost." There was no thrill in his words, no pride, just the cold, undeniable truth. The referee, an impartial officer of the Galactic Armed Forces Academy, stepped forward, signaling the end of the match. Victory to Cadet Eric Thompson. The crowd erupted into applause, though the noise was drowned by the deafening sound of Eric's heart pounding in his ears. He didn't feel the rush of triumph that he'd expected. There was no sense of elation. Instead, there was only the weight of what he had just accomplished. Humanity had been underestimated, dismissed as weak, but today, Eric had proven that wasn't the case. Zor'Khaz, defeated and humiliated, was helped to his feet by his fellow Drexar cadets. He glared at Eric one last time, his pride shattered, but his fury still burning. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes made it clear. This wasn't over. Eric, however, turned his back on the Drexar without a second glance. The battle was won, and he had shown the galaxy that humanity would no longer be overlooked. The journey was just beginning. As he left the arena, his fellow humans rushed to him, their faces filled with awe and admiration. They had seen what he had done, but it was more than just a fight. It was a statement to the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated, and Eric Thompson, against all odds, had become the symbol of that truth. A new dawn, The weight of victory settled heavily on Eric Thompson's shoulders as he walked through the corridors of the Galactic Armed Forces Academy, the echo of his footsteps blending with the murmur of conversations that surrounded him. The buzz of excitement was palpable. Students from every corner of the galaxy whispered his name, their voices tinged with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something else, respect. Eric couldn't escape the looks as he passed, but they weren't the jeers and mocking stares he had grown accustomed to when he first arrived. Now, there was something different in the air. It was a shift, subtle but undeniable. The cadets, alien and human alike, were beginning to see him, not just as a human, but as a warrior. He had defeated Zor'Khaz, the Drexar bully, and in doing so, he had proven something far greater than his own personal strength. He had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just about the fight, it was the message it sent to the entire academy, to every species watching. But even as the weight of this realization settled in, Eric's mind couldn't help but return to the moment in the arena, when Zor'Khaz had collapsed under his assault. He had won, and yet something gnawed at him. The Drexar had been brutal, arrogant, and cruel, but Eric had seen something more in Zor'Khaz's eyes after the fight, something that lingered long after the match was over. He had seen the flicker of something unfamiliar to him in the Drexar's gaze. Was it fear, or was it respect? Eric didn't know, but it was a question that lingered in his mind long after the crowd had dispersed. As he made his way to his quarters, Eric was approached by several cadets, their eyes wide with admiration. "Eric, that was amazing." A female Zor'Khaz, a species known for their advanced telepathic abilities, said, her tone filled with genuine respect. "I didn't think you could do it, but you really showed them." Eric smiled, but there was no joy in it. "It wasn't just me," he said, his voice steady but distant. "It was the belief that humanity could stand on equal footing with anyone in this academy. We're not just here to learn. We're here to prove ourselves." The Zor'Khaz cadet nodded. "You did more than that today. You showed the galaxy that humans aren't just an afterthought. You made us all proud." Eric could feel the warmth of the praise, but the truth was it didn't feel like enough. The fight had been a personal victory, yes, but it had also been a reflection of something larger, something deeper that Eric hadn't fully understood until now. As the group of cadets dispersed, Eric turned toward his quarters. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped inside, closing it behind him. The room was small but comfortable, a quiet sanctuary away from the bustle of the academy. He sank into the chair by the window, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars stretched out before him like an infinite sea, their distant glow both beautiful and daunting. The view had always fascinated him. Earth was just a tiny speck in the vast cosmos, and yet humanity had made its mark. Eric had joined the academy to prove that humans could rise above their limitations, that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the galaxy's greatest warriors. But now, in the quiet of his room, Eric realized there was more to it than just proving his own worth. It was about changing perceptions, about showing that humanity had something no other species could match, the will to fight for their place in the universe. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. He reached over and activated the console on the wall. The holographic screen flickered to life, revealing the face of his superior officer, Captain Ilara Thorn. "Cadet Thompson," she said, her tone crisp but not unkind. "I trust you're settling in after your victory." Eric nodded, though he couldn't bring himself to smile. "I'm fine, Captain. Just thinking. There's something important we need to discuss," Captain Thorn continued. "Your victory today wasn't just about defeating Zor'Khaz. You've gained the attention of the higher command. They want to see you." Eric's heart skipped a beat. The higher command? That meant the Council, the top officials of the Galactic Armed Forces. They rarely interacted with cadets, let alone summon them. This wasn't just a formality. It was something bigger. "Is this about my performance in the arena?" Eric asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not just that," Captain Thorn said, her eyes narrowing. "There's a much bigger picture here. You've made an impression on the galaxy, and that impression might be exactly what we need." Eric's mind raced. He had never imagined his victory would lead to something like this. He had thought he was just proving a point, showing that humanity wasn't weak, that they could hold their own in this galaxy of giants. But now, it seemed like something more was at play. What do you mean? Eric asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. The Galactic Armed Forces are in a precarious position, Captain Thorne replied, her gaze steady and focused. We've been at a standstill for years, balancing power among the established species. But there's a threat coming, something none of us can ignore. And your victory today has shown that humanity might be the wild card we need. Eric was silent for a moment, processing her words. The threat she spoke of was something he had only heard whispers about. Rumors of a new force rising in the outer reaches of the galaxy, a threat that had yet to be fully understood. He had never imagined that his victory over Zor'Khaz could be tied to something so much larger than himself. What do you want me to do? Eric asked, his voice steady now, as if the weight of the situation had finally settled into place. There's a mission, Captain Thorne said, her tone serious. We need you to be a part of it, and the rest of humanity will be watching you, Cadet Thompson. The galaxy is watching. Eric stood up from the chair, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about proving humanity's worth anymore. It was about protecting it. A new chapter was beginning, not just for him, but for all of humanity. And no matter what lay ahead, he would be ready.